Well, hello, everybody. Hope you are having a nice conference. So I'm going to talk about asynchronous data streams in Angular 2. And, well, I'm really excited that now we have Angular 2 in Vita. And before that, we were having a lot of issues, breaking changes, and all the people that it's studying Angular 2 and how to use it were having a lot of trouble. But since Vita, I would recommend you to start using it and start learning how it works. So let's start the talk. So first, I want to introduce myself. So I'm an Angular GDE. GDE stands for Google Developer Expert. And 2 years ago, I come from a Microsoft background. I was doing C#. And then 2 years ago, I switched to JavaScript. And I fell in love with it. So since then, I was doing Angular. And I started to blog about it. I started my Twitter account, and I started to do community work. So I created Angular Labs, and I would like to show you a little bit of it. So this is our logo, and this is a different format. When I first got into the Angular community, I was going to events like AngularJS London, and I was missing some of the coding. So I thought to create this group, and basically, this is a hands-on format. So it's not a workshop, it's not a training. It's just you following some exercises that you can learn different Angular topics. So we cover Angular 1, of course, and lately Angular 2. And then basically what you get, maybe is that too small? You get an exercise, and you can follow the exercise. We usually create a plunker, so it's just getting into the plunker environment, and you can follow the instructions. It's really cool. We have done few events. It started last April. You can see the topics. So yeah, that was just some little plug I wanted to do. So yeah, I usually like to show the events that are happening. So let's show. So next week there's NGNL happening in Amsterdam, and the speakers are really amazing. I would recommend you to check it out on social media at the time. Then a little bit later, in May, we have the biggest conference in Angular, and this is NGConf. You probably have seen some of the videos that are on YouTube, and they are really deep and done by the Angular team, usually. I also want to announce that I'm doing a two-day workshop on Angular 2. This will be in April. So we will be covering everything from TypeScript, dependency injection, all the common suspects, HTTP. There's also the component router, unit testing, migration from Angular 1. So if you are using Angular, this is a nice way to get into Angular 2. And finally, there's also Angular Connect happening in London next September. So yeah, a lot of things going on in the Angular community. So really excited about it. So let's see what I meant with asynchronous data streams. I was kind of hiding the topic that it's reactive extensions. It's behind of it, but the concept is asynchronous data stream. So behind that, there's all of the explanations. So let's follow the definition. So asynchronous is usually handled in JavaScript with callbacks, and usually we will register a callback, and then when the task is done or is finished, we will get that executed. And that's the basic way to handle this kind of operations. Then the data part is just raw information. So it can be in JavaScript, it can be numbers, strings, objects. And then in ECMAScript 6, we have sets, maps. So it's any information that can go through the stream. And that's the next part. So streams are basically sequences that come available over time. And maybe let's see an example that will be more clear visually. So we have a stream. Let's call it like this, stream, and we subscribe to it, and it starts emitting values. So we get one value. This will be the number 1. And then over time, there will happen some event that will trigger another value. And that's basically the idea. The values, we don't get the values at once. We are getting the values at different times. Then we receive the last value, and then the stream is finished. So that's one basic example. If we want to do the same example with arrays, in the normal way, we will do a call, probably to a backend, and we will receive a value. And the closest value that we can try to emulate the stream, it will be an array. But then, when we get the value, we get the full array. So there's no asynchronous handling here. And I wanted to show you in this dynamic way. So let's see what has been the timeline for streams. That is another name that we can use instead of asynchronous data streams. So it's seen in Unix in 1973, and it's called pipes at the time. Maybe you remember some of the command lines. The pipes that appear there, these are also implementing streams. Later on, we also see streams, another implementation in Node, and that will be already in JavaScript. And then finally, this year, we can see a major framework using what it's called in Angular 2, it's called async pipes. So they are using the same name as in Unix. And more popularly, it's also known as observable sequences, or you can also call them observables. But you can see that observables, you are losing the sequence that I wanted to explain at the beginning. So you need to remember that the stream, it's still a sequence of values that are coming at some point. So the stream is still kind of running. It's waiting for the new value to come. So before getting into details of Angular 2 implementation, one thing that I found on my labs is people get really confused because you have to use operators, And this comes from functional programming. And if you are not familiar with these concepts, you will get lost. So it's easy to see that why I put this part here. So we have on arrays, we have the array methods, we have for each, map, filter, and reduce. And this will be the basic operators that we can also use with streams. And then it's also a good start point to see how we compose the different operators. And that's something that we will use a lot. So I will show you some examples. For array methods, let's say we start with this array. So this is a team. These are team members from the Angular core. And I just took some of the commits. So we have how many commits they have done. So that's a pretty easy data to start with. And we are going to use this data to apply some of the array methods. So let's start with the easiest one, for each. This will be the implementation for using a for. So we can see we just start the index. We also catch the length of the array, and we start just going through it. In this case, I'm just rendering the names. So I'm also projecting. I'm just selecting part of the data. So we will be losing the commits here. If we use for each from the array, we can see how we can translate the for with just a function. And then this function will take each of the members of the team or items and we'll just do the same as we were doing before. But we can see that we have lost one implementation detail, that it's the index. So in this case, we are not seeing the index, which is good because it helps composition later on. So let's see another one. That's another example, and that's a map. So for the map implementation, if we try to implement it using a for, we first have to create a new array, and we can use new team. And as we go through the array, as we did before, we are just pushing each of the members of the team to the new array. So we can see a similar implementation here. If we look at the map method within the array, that's how it would look. So the map works in a way that we have to return each of the new elements that will go on the end array. And in this case, I'm using a literal. So we will receive a member on the function, and then I will use the name of the member to create the new object, and that object will be pushed into the new array that in this implementation is not seen. So let's look into another one. So filter can be implemented like this. And in my example, I want to take all the members that have done over 100 commits. And we can see the logic just checking on the commits and just pushing them, all these members, pushing them on the new array. So that's one way of doing it. If we use the filter method in the array, we can see that the implementation is also not using the index, but the logic is still the same. So we are checking the commits. And in this case, the way it works is if we return an expression that evaluates to a truthy value, it will get this element into the new array. That will be, as we have in the original implementation, will be a new instance. And then, for last, this is probably the most difficult to grasp, and that's reduce. So let's see how it will look in JavaScript. So we start with reduce function that will calculate how many commits the team has done. So we'll go through each of the members and we'll just aggregate these commits to the total. And we can see how we are using the initial value, and then how for each of the team members we are calculating and aggregating this value to the total. So let's see how we can do this with the reduce method from the array. So in this case, we're using the total, it's the cumulator, and then the member will be the item. We can pass the initial value as a parameter, and then the function will be just doing the same operation that we were doing before. But in this case, we are losing the index, so that will be an implementation detail that we don't have to reference anymore. And this looks more like a refactoring of the 4, and it is. But what happens is when we hide the implementation details, we can then compose the different operations in a really nice way. So that brings us to the next point. So let's imagine we implement these functions, and that will be our logic. And in this case, we have the similar functions we have seen before. The first one is just checking the commits. Then we are projecting the name. And I also added a function to change to uppercase. So that's pretty easy to see. What we can do then is use the functions to just compose them. So we can start with the team, the original array, start filtering, then we can use map to do the different operations, and then use for each to just output the result. So you can see that we have completely removed any index references, and the code just looks really nice. And these are the concepts that will be used in reactive extensions, and that's the library that the Angular 2 team is using. Okay. So let's review the key concepts. The first key concept will be the observable, or as we have seen before, the observable sequence. And that's basically the stream. You can also call it stream. It's easier for conversations. Then what the API of the observable offers us is a set of operators that can do, as we have seen with filter and map and reduce, they do the similar job, but acting on different behaviors. So, for example, we can use merge that will take two observables and will add them together. Then we have also concat, map, and more, and that gives us a lot of power to implement our logic, as we have seen on the basic example I shown before. Then another key concept is the observer, and as the observer, we will have three different handlers. So as the observable will be emitting these values, we can subscribe to them with these separate functions. So if we receive a new value, that will be handled on next. Then if there is an error, we can handle that on the on error. And then obviously we can stop the stream, because that means that we are not expecting more values. So we can say, okay, we are done. And we can trigger that and handle that on the other side as a consumer in the uncompleted. And then finally, we will see the pairing. So we have an observable. We subscribe to it using the observer, so we can handle the different cases. And then finally, we can also unsubscribe. So these are all the concepts, quite a few of them. So let's start with the Observable API. And this will be an implementation of an observable, and we can see the details. And then this will be matching the observable when we use it. So as we can see, we create the observable, and then we are using the new fat arrow notation, and I think that's also called a lambda expression in the other languages. So you will get an observer as an input parameter, and then we can use the observer to emit the different values. And then we can see some examples with 1, 2, 3 that we use. And then once we are happy, we can also say, okay, we are complete now. We are not going to emit any other values. And this is kind of a, really basic observable. We can build, with this API, we can build all sorts of observables, but this is an easiest one. Then we can also see how error handling would work. So we can also trigger the onError handler and pass some information. So that's pretty easy. So let's see how a basic string could be expressed. So we have what is called the ASCII Marvel diagram, and that's a way to express what we're expecting from our observable. So in this case, we can see timeline on the first. The first one is rx.interval, and that's using milliseconds. So that means the way it works is every second it will emit a new value, and interval starts with 0. So once we subscribe to this observable, it will emit 0, then 1, then 2, then 3, and then it just never ends. It will just continue, keep going. And that's what we express with the arrow, so that will just go on. If we apply an operator, and that will be using composition, we can see that if we apply another operator, like take, we get a new stream or a new observable, and in this case, take will just grab the number of values that we pass as a parameter, and after this value has been reached, it will just trigger a complete event. Then we can also express that an error has happened with X, and when the stream is finished, we can use the pipe. So that's quite handy. There are also some tools that we can use, and I wanted to show this one. And this one has been built by the author of CycleJS, and he has been quite active on Twitter, and it's quite exciting. So on the Angular 2 team, they are able now to create these Marvel diagrams, like in a visual form. And right now, this tool allows you to move the values and do some cool things. So here we can say, okay, we will take from this stream on the top, we will take 2. So that means that the stream resulting from that operation will just take these 2 values and then finish. And we can see that it's going to finish right when it emits the value. We can also see another example using map. So if we remember map, it's just going through all the items and returning them. So in this case, we are getting the value, the input, and we are just multiplying it by 10 using this fat arrow notation in JavaScript. So that will just produce this stream on the bottom. So that's pretty easy. And obviously, these are like the easiest ones. Then you can, if you are interested, you can follow the links on the left. Okay. So let's see how this code would look to make it, to execute it. So till now, we were just describing it. So we have the observable, and we are saying, okay, we want a value every second, and then we will take 3 elements. But nothing has happened. It kind of, it's done in 2 phases. So one, it's setting up the stream, and the other one is subscribing to it. And only when we subscribe to it, it will execute. So it's kind of a lazy implementation. There are some operators that will trigger the operations when we, in a way that it's synchronous. But then you need to follow the documentation. So in this case, we are triggering the execution and we are getting the output, which is what we would expect from the setup. So let's see what the observer object is. When we subscribe to the observable, as we saw at the beginning, we have these 3 handlers, and each of them will be triggered by, the first one will be triggered by new values, the second one will be triggered when there is an error, and the last one will be triggered when we call on the implementation completed. So that's quite similar to promises with different handlers. We can also create the observer in another step, so we can then pass it to subscribe. So that's another way of creating the observer. Let's see how unsubscribe works. So the way we can unsubscribe, so let's imagine we create this stream of values, we have handled the values, it's now terminated, it's completed, and we don't want these handlers just hanging around. So we want to clear these handlers. We don't want them to be handled by the library. So the way it works, we get a function, and we can call it with unsubscribe. And that will execute the cleanup of these handlers. And obviously, that means that if we have different subscribers, there could be some of these subscribers that just want to unsubscribe, and then obviously the stream will keep going. This is not stopping the stream. It's just on the subscriber side. So let's see some differences from arrays and streams. Arrays are for synchronous handling. As we have seen at the beginning, we have a map and filter, and there's something to notice is that they create new arrays. And then, obviously, we need these values in memory. And that's it could have some performance implications. If we implement our logic with streams, we can handle both synchronous and asynchronous operations. So for example, streams allow us to work with arrays and maps, and then it will just switch to synchronous processing. So that's another quality of streams that can work both in both modes. Then another good thing about streams is they only deal with an item at a time. So it's, the processing is really light. And that means that they consume less memory. And they are not as good for small data sets, but they are really good for large ones. And I have one video I wanted to show you. So this video is from last Angular Connect, and it has Ben Lesh, that is the project manager for reactive extensions. Let's see.
But here's a quick.
So in the example, I'll explain a little bit. So we have the items on the left, and then he's applying different operators, filter, map, and reduce. And we can see that some of the operations are changing the shape of the items. So they start with a circle, then they will change to a square, and then it will use reduce to aggregate the values. It's not the easiest example, but yeah, let's watch it.
Animation of what using operators in an array looks like. I'm filtering, then I'm mapping to squares, then I'm going to reduce to a stack. And you'll see these two stacks in the middle are actually arrays that were created by each step. So one thing to know about this is if you're doing this on really huge arrays, if you're doing it on small arrays, this is going to be much faster than using an observable. So if you have small arrays you're dealing with and you want to filter and map, don't use observable for that. If they're large arrays, though, all of these intermediary arrays here, they're going to need to be garbage collected at some point, right? And garbage collection eats your thread. You also are going through every single one of them each time, so it's computationally expensive. In an observable, each value is going to go all the way through, kind of like a transducer to the end as it goes through. So no intermediary arrays produce a lot more efficient. However, again, I would caution you not to do that with small arrays because it'll be a little bit slower. It's when you get up into larger sized arrays.
So I hope this clarified a little bit the ideas I was trying to communicate. So as we saw, the main difference is on each intermediary step, we have to kind of have in the first example working with arrays, we need all the arrays at least to hold the temporary results, and that means that will consume memory. And on the streams on the other side, we just need the processing for one element. So that changes when we work with large data sets. Okay. So I want to introduce Angular 2, take the advantage of the talk, and show you an example of streams. And in Angular 2, we use TypeScript, and I would like to know how many of you are familiar with it. Okay. How many of you are familiar with ECMAScript 6? Okay. So, yeah, if you are not using TypeScript, it's okay. But if you are not using ECMAScript 6, you should start looking into it. So I will explain the differences between the two. And obviously, the Angular team chose to use TypeScript because it has some benefits, and they wanted to use some of the features that are not available on ECMAScript 6. So for them, there's not really an option. They use TypeScript. But as a consumer of Angular 2, we can use any of the languages. We can use ECMAScript 5, ECMAScript 6, or TypeScript. So this is just a slide to explain you what are these differences. But they are not really useful if you want to use Angular 2. You don't need to use any of these languages if you don't want. So basically, ECMAScript 6 is also called ECMAScript 2015. And it introduces a lot of features, but the main features that we are going to see in Angular 2 are classes, the new module system, and also arrow functions, or fat arrows. And in TypeScript, the main features that the Angular team were interested were types and annotations, and also that the advantage of using this information to provide better IDE support. As you can see on the diagram, you can see ECMAScript 5 in the middle, and then it kind of grows into ECMAScript 6 and TypeScript. And that means that if you use TypeScript, you are using, at the end, you are using ECMAScript 5. And optionally, you can start introducing types. But it will look exactly like ECMAScript 5 if you're not using any of the other features. So let's go over some of these functions. I will skip some of them. So that's mostly the first feeling when the Angular community heard about TypeScript. Besides that, it's built by Microsoft. So it's a little bit like, okay, let's think about it. So this is an overview of features on ECMAScript 6. And as you can see, it's full of them. We have the arrow functions. We also have the LED keyboard, block scopes, and all the rest. And some of these features will be more like syntax sugar. Some of them will be like really useful, and you will be using them a lot. But then some of them are a little bit a complement. And probably one of them will be the arrow functions. I think arrow functions are like really common in Angular 2 code. So these are some tools that you can use today to start learning ECMAScript 6. So probably this has been looked a lot, and people have implemented different solutions. And with ECMAScript 6, there will be a proposal for loading modules from the standard. So that's a nice addition. So we don't need to use third-party libraries. So the import is really just working as other languages like Python. So you are just saying, okay, I want this function or this object from this module, and it will just work the way you expect. Then we have some nice like alias. We can also pick multiple options. So that would be one library. And that one is using exports. we can also see this other library using default, and that's changing a little bit the way we do the import. But then once we have these functions imported, we can just go ahead and use them. So they are pretty straightforward. Another nice feature is classes. So we don't have to use the prototypes that maybe look a little bit awkward. So we have some nice keywords for defining the constructor. We have the class. So that's a nice feature there. We also have the structuring. This one is also nice when you are working with config objects. So you can pick from an array and load this data into different variables. Quite nice. This also is a nice feature that covers multi-line strings and interpolation. And it just replaces the old code that would be just concatenating the different strings. So that's also nice. Then we have arrow functions. There I think that everyone is used to. So I won't spend too much. Then we have default parameters. So that's replacing some like legacy code in JavaScript. Now we can express it like really nice using the parameters. And on TypeScript, we are using, basically in Angular 2, we are using annotations. And besides that, we have the types. So we are expressing the types with colons. We also have generics. That's also a nice feature coming with TypeScript. We also have like nice IDE support. So if you're using one of these IDEs, it will help you develop Angular 2 applications. So I wanted to go through a basic Angular 2 application and show you how we can use a stream by a call to an HTTP service. So I'm guessing that I don't have that much time. So I'll try to show you the code. So this is a really easy service implementation. We are importing the HTTP module, making it available with an annotation that in this case is injectable. And we can see the call here. It's just a regular get for a JSON file. And we can see that it's returning an observable. We can use map with it. In this case, JSON will take the body of the response and just return it. And that will be our observable. Then on the other side, on the consumer side, we have the users component, and we are calling this method that is returning an observable. And let's see if we can make it bigger. We can see how we are subscribing and just using the onNext handler. And in this case, we are getting the response. Let's see if we can see the object. So this will be the JSON coming back. And here, we are just assigning it to the user list. And let's see how we can easily take these values and show them with Angular 2. In Angular 2, we have the similar features as we had in Angular 1. In this case, we're using ng4 that is replacing it. And we get the different users, and we are putting them on a local template bar. And in this case, once we get the user in this object, we can reference it. So it's really easy to show the different properties. And if we look at the output, it will look just like this. And I've also implemented an event. In this case, I'm just log into the console. So when I click on a user, it will just console log the name. And that can be implemented like really easy. So we have the event that we can just reference using the parentheses notation, and then just call a method on the class, and that will execute the trace on the console. There's one thing I like to do on my talks, and I'm on the last few minutes. So I will ask you a question about Angular, and the first person will get Angular 2 sticker that was personally handed to me by the project manager, Igor Mina. So that's a really nice sticker. And the question for you is, what's the name of the latest Angular 1.5 release? So you probably have to check it. But for the person that gets that answer right, the first one will get the sticker. Now we have a section for questions.
Yeah, 2 minutes of questions. Everyone's looking up the answer to the question, I assume.
No questions? Okay. Then the first person that comes here gets the sticker. That's much easier. Okay, thank you everyone.